Okay, why I stopped racing my bike. Now, when I got into running, 5Ks and 10Ks and then very quickly to 50K, then I looked further at 100K, 100 milers. And then you start to look at the top people in the sport, what are they doing and how can I get better? And what I saw was people like Kilian and Anton Krupicka, this is more than 10 years ago. And they were running a lot of ultras, but in the winter, they would transition to ski mountaineering and cycling. I'd done a lot of cycling in 2009 when I went cycle touring for the year. And I'd done a lot of cycling as a kid on BMXs and mountain bikes and then racing my road bike. So I literally used that as to supplement my training when I lived in Granada 8 months of the year, the entire summer in Granada in the south of Spain. And then what I would do when I moved to Chiang Mai and spent 4 months in Chiang Mai, I'd do about 250 kilometers a week in Granada. And most of the time I'd be running. And then when I moved to Chiang Mai, I'd double that and do 500 kilometers plus a week. And that was because I would take the pressure off the body, run a little bit less, run between 60 and 80 kilometers a week, sometimes a little bit more. And a sweet spot was sort of like 100 kilometers running, 400 kilometers cycling. So not a great deal volume wise, but add to that the gym stuff and things were starting to go really well for me. So it definitely helps, and you need to cycle in a certain way, you need the bike fit in a certain way in order for it to help you as a runner. But it's easy to get involved in that in Chiang Mai because you're surrounded by thousands of cyclists. There must be thousands of cyclists. There's at least a ride or 2 or 3 group rides every single day of the week, and you're riding into the mountains from your doorstep into the mountains on the flat, north, east, south, west, any direction you go, it's beautiful. So, and the same in Granada, it's beautiful there, and again, any direction you go, and from your doorstep, you're in the nature. So it's not like, I suppose as well with that, with so many cyclists, the drivers take more care because they're more used to cyclists on the road. When I'm in the UK, it's a nightmare, and when I'm in the US, it's a nightmare as well. Here in Dubai, you need to go to designated areas where it's an 8-kilometer loop, not too far from here in Meydan, or an 80-kilometer loop or a 50-kilometer loop out in the desert, and that gets very boring after a little while because you're just looking at sand all the way around. But in Granada and Chiang Mai, you're in the nature immediately. So lots of cyclists, and I would guess that it is the best place you can possibly cycle from November to February, March every year. It's absolutely amazing in Chiang Mai. So lots of cyclists there, lots of people on the same wavelength. Cars are a lot easier on you. You get involved in group rides, and then you start to find people who you click with. And I started to find people who I clicked with, and we would cycle up in the mountains and then literally race down as well. And I guess that's where it sort of gets away from sensible, because I was using this to supplement my running training. So great to go on long rides, 3, 4, 5 hours. Wasn't so great going uphill because when you're clipped into a pedal, you pull the pedal with your stroke. So it's not just kind of like you're using force along the whole rotation of your pedal. So when you're pulling, I found out that when I'm pulling the pedal up, I'm using muscles in my quadriceps that develop, and they're then are not useful for when I'm marathon running or ultra marathon running. I soon got cramps in muscles that I didn't even know I had when I started to kind of race again in the spring of the following years. So racing down comes with its own risks, and those are pretty obvious. But I felt that because I'd cycled as a kid, and because I'd learned how to fall, I'd learned kind of weight distribution, I'd learned sort of velocity and how to kind of like lean into corners, etc. I felt pretty capable, and I was redeveloping those skills again. So I'd ride up the mountains with the guys and then race down, and we'd have a great time. The thing with racing downhill on the road, you've got to not be fearless, but you've got to block out the risks. There's a lot can happen. You can kind of, especially on the famous segment in Chiang Mai is Doi Satep, and it's the most ridden segment on Strava in the whole of Asia. So there's hundreds of thousands of attempts up and down the mountain. And we, as a group of friends, we were all trying to get to the top of get the KOM and get in the top 10. And to get in the top 10, you'd need to kind of average 60, 65 kilometers. It's an 11K hill at 6%. So it's super windy. So you've got to know first of all, you've got to learn the corners, and then you've got to know them off by heart, and then you've got to block out those risks, whether that's a dog in the road, or whether it's a stick, whether it's some oil, whether it's other cars. And we often cycle when it was quite trafficy, because people like to get up there for the sunrise, for the sunset, and all the time in between as well, because there's a famous temple up there called, I forgot the temple, but it's Untitled Chapter. It's a famous temple, and it was a soap or something like that, which made it super popular in Thailand. So we'd go up there and we'd race down. I remember this one time when there was me and Vigard, a guy from Norway, who was brilliant on a bike and brilliant downhill. And we were racing, and I just got ahead of him and took the KOM. And literally, he was so competitive, and this was, I guess, the big problem. He was so competitive that we turned round after about 100 meters, and he wanted to go straight back up because he wanted to take the title. So we went straight back up the mountain, and that takes you about 35, 40 minutes to ride up pretty easy, because you want to conserve your energy for coming down, which sounds wild, but that's true. We rode up the mountain, and then 10 minutes and 15 seconds or something later, he retook the KOM, or took the KOM. And so he had it. So I had it for about 45, 50 minutes, which was hilarious, but that was the level of competitiveness between us. And there's another couple of guys, one guy kind of like crashed going over a stick or something. Another guy crashed quite badly on a corner, just literally slipped, and then rode, like we saw the video of him riding into an SUV. That had kind of put on the brakes, but just about stopped, and then he hit, and then he was in a coma for a little while. And then it kind of wakes you up, or it should wake you up. But I continued to go for this. And then I came across my own problem where I crashed. And it was really funny because I'd had a great season running, and then I was getting fit on the bike. I was cycling up and down. I was cycling all over and doing lots of kilometers, but I was still racing downhill because I still wanted that KOM. And I remember I was very kind of close, and Garmin has this thing where it tells you are on Strava Live segments, you're 1 second ahead or 1 second, or it tells you how many seconds behind or ahead. And I was like 1 second behind the KOM with 1.8 kilometers to go. That's the last thing I remembered. And then all of a sudden, I went into a corner too wide, tried to correct it, and then slipped. And instead of kind of putting on the brakes or trying to stop, I thought I could ride into or off the road. And then I just rode off the road, went into this gutter, which is like a concrete gutter, and then just went over. And I just remember being lay on my back, facing up the mountain. I don't know where my bike was, but I remember coming to and just thinking, shit. Like, I checked, before I'd even checked if there were any broken bones, my first thought was, shit, what am I going to do when I have to call the Team GB coach or manager and say, oh, I'm not able to run in the World Championships because I've just crashed my bike and broke my femur or broke my collarbone. And miraculously, I got up, like by this point, it must have been a few minutes had passed. By this point, a few cars had stopped. And I thought I was fine because I got up. I could not believe I hadn't broke anything. Usually you break your clavicle first. But I knew I was in pain. So when people are asking me, I said I was okay. The pain hits you a little bit later, so there's probably a bit of shock there. And then the real pain, once I'd realized that there was a lot of blood flowing from one part of my body, then I realized that I needed to go to hospital. And when I got over to my bike, I realized that I couldn't ride to hospital, so I needed to get a lift. So somebody offered me a lift really kindly. I decided to get dropped off near my appointment. I didn't think it was that near my apartment. Didn't think it was that bad. I went to my apartment, got a shower, tried to wash up a little bit, and then I took my bike into the shop to get fixed because it was almost a write-off. And they then saw me and how kind of much blood I had on me, how many cuts, and said, get to the hospital. Then when you go to the hospital, you quickly get woken up because that scrubbing with alcohol sponges, it's like 4 guys on me scrubbing for 45 minutes, and that is insane pain, to the point where the guy was like, do you want painkiller? And I was like, no, it's okay. How long is this going to take? And they said about 45 minutes. And I was like, okay, give me whatever you've got. And then I just kind of like, still could feel everything, but not to the extent. And then you realize, and it wasn't even that crash that stopped me from racing, because I was very quickly up and going again, because that was quite a convenient crash. All the cuts were in the right places, so it didn't bother me too much. But then when I got back to Spain, maybe only 2-3 years ago, I had a stupid crash where I was doing maybe 50 kilometers an hour, but I went around a corner on cold tires. I just climbed up this mountain, and I'd only been cycling a short time, and I went around this corner on cold tires, and I must have hit a bit of oil or something, and the bike just left behind me, and all the cuts were alongside my right side and were all on the joints. So knee joint, hip joint was the worst, and then elbow and wrist and shoulder. And so all those cuts wouldn't fix because I couldn't move, and therefore I couldn't walk, I couldn't run. So for 2 weeks I was out of action completely, and then it took still to this day, 2-3 years later, this is during COVID, I still have the cut. So it's not necessarily the danger that stopped me, it's the inconvenience. It's the inconvenience of kind of being out of action and not being able to run. It also is a bit stupid if you have a crash like that and you're racing downhill, or you're doing something that doesn't need to be doing, you're chasing something like Strava KOM, you can get into real danger. And you obviously get to a point in your life where you realize that people actually care about me. So if anything bad was to really happen, they wouldn't, that would be horrible for them to deal with. So you just come to a conclusion. I'm going to be racing my bike a lot in the next 3, 4, 5 months, but I'm not going to be racing downhill. I'm just going to be taking it easier, because there's just an element of risk reward that you cannot justify at that point. So yeah, that's the reason. In terms of cycling for your fitness, I'll make another video about it, because cycling for running fitness, if you get it right, can catapult you into another world.